Hey, it's Allie, and this week we'll be studying the 1980s and we'll be looking at how cable television drastically changes our television landscape. To do this, we'll be focusing on one channel in particular, MTV. I'm a child of the 1980s. I'm a Gen Xer, as I've mentioned in the past, and MTV was really prominent in my youth, so I love sharing this early old school MTV with all of you when we study the 1980s. And even though I love MTV and I love everything about it during this era, I can't really emphasize how important MTV was. And it drastically changed the television landscape. MTV really changes everything. It doesn't just change cable television, it changes network television, and it even changes the way that printed media delivers its product. So, this is a channel that debuts on August 1st, 1981. I'm not usually a big stickler on dates, but I think having the actual date MTV launches really helps you understand that it's there at the beginning of the decade, and by the end of the 1980s, cable television has become a standard thing in the television landscape, and people expect more than just the big three. So again, this channel debuts on August 1st, 1981, and MTV is really part of the postmodern art movement. So when we looked at the 1960s, especially with the television show Batman, we looked at how TV was fitting into the pop art movement of that era. MTV is really part of the postmodern art movement of the 1980s, and this is an art movement that really manifests by the late 1970s and has become part of the general popular culture by the 1980s. And there's a little bit more information about postmodernism on our Canvas website on our course page, but I just wanted to kind of bring that up because I really like us to look at how television is part of that overall artistic movement of an era. So postmodernism is really something that when you look at a show such as South Park, that's also in a postmodern vein, and it really pokes humor. So it's making fun of things, but it's also making a cultural critique while doing that. And MTV, we can see this with the very first video that debuts on the channel, is by the Buggles, and this is a UK band, and the video that they chose was "Video Kills the Radio Star." So that's kind of an ironic approach. It's making fun of something, but it's also kind of a truism, and so that's really kind of postmodernism from the very beginning. And when you see this first day of MTV, you'll also see kind of a collage-like aesthetic and very quick cuts. So it's moving at a much more rapid pace than regular broadcast television did in the earlier eras. And there's been studies done that show that TV and film moved at a much slower pace prior to the 1980s, and MTV is really seen as one of the reasons for this tremendous shift in the moving images. And so we see animation, we see this kind of quick cuts, we see music being prominent. And this doesn't just stay in the music video realm. We start to see this kind of aesthetic enter into films, television shows, and non-fictional programming such as sports and the news. So prior to the 1980s, when you watched the news, you would have the newscasters, but by the 1980s we start having like a banner, so there's multiple parts of information coming in a collage-like format with a very stylized presentation, and we can see a lot of this really starting here in this early years of MTV. So another thing that you'll see in this first day of MTV is they start having rockets blasting towards the sky, and they're kind of declaring as they show, you know, the moon launch, the space launches, the landing towards the moon. They're saying all of this stuff. It like MTV, we're as important as this. This is a pivotal moment in human history. And so again, this is a little bit ironic. This is just a music video channel for the youth market, and it's making these broad declarations. But really, MTV does make that kind of mark on the television landscape, and so it's a really interesting channel to look at. So this is a channel that was really for the youth market, and we see this type of niche marketing be part of cable television from its inception. So you have channels such as MTV, music television, meant for the youth market. We have a channel such as Nickelodeon that's created for the child demographic. We've got ESPN for sports fans. We've got Sundance, IFC for film buffs. So instead of trying to reach the entire population like we saw in the era of the big three, plus PBS comes along by the 1970s, but we see those channels trying to reach for everyone at the same time, and now we start to see niche marketing become the norm with the advent of cable television. So one of the things that really surprises students when we're looking at early MTV is, first of all, just the plain emphasis on music. As cable has changed and as internet has advanced how we can watch television and music videos, now you can just go search into a search engine and watch any music video you want anytime. MTV really shifted its programming. But what it has done is stay true to the youth market. And so now we have reality television and other types of programming on the channel, and that's a way for MTV to continue to stay relevant to that market. MTV also has strong roots in social justice, and this is a little bit surprising, especially because in its early days, MTV was a very, very white channel. Most of the artists in rotation were white artists. They were from kind of the new wave kind of pop movement, and that was coming from the East Coast United States, especially New York City, or from Britain, like we see with the Buggles. And part of this is just there's a plethora of musical films that are coming out of Europe, and this kind of harkens back to the 60s and 70s, and so there's more moving images created with music to start out with for the channel. But then it really takes us to get to Michael Jackson and his phenomenal popularity in the 1980s to have a black artist become in regular rotation on the channel. And so we see this with Jackson. We'll watch a couple of his videos this week. Of course, we'll watch Thriller. Thriller's very much a classic. And Thriller is actually the first music video that was selected for inclusion for preservation in the Library of Congress. So it is a very historical music video, and many people still find it to be one of the finest of the genre, even to this day. Now, there's been a lot of more musical videos, musical films created, and so maybe it's not the number one video the way it was in my era, but it's still able to compete with things that are being created today, and that's a pretty phenomenal situation. And one of the reasons that Thriller was seen as such a landmark film is because, or landmark music video, is because it's actually a short film. The way that it is a short film is that it has a very strong narrative structure. And so we see this in an earlier video, and this is the one where Michael Jackson really breaks that race barrier on the channel, and that's Billie Jean. And so a lot of these trademarks of a Jackson video that we see in Thriller, with the strong narrative structure, heavy special effects, and of course the dancing, we see at a lighter level in Billie Jean, and we'll watch that video this week in class as well. So MTV had a little bit of struggle in its early years to get to that social justice part with race. However, it really does embrace Black American culture by the end of the 1980s, and it does so with a show called Yo! MTV Raps. And this is a show that debuts by the end of the decade, and it's one of its hosts is Fab Five Freddy, who is a very famous graffiti artist from New York City. And so they're going to people from the inside of this culture to broadcast it to the rest of us in America. And hip-hop, it really emerges in urban environments in America, and so that a minority audience is much more familiar with this type of music in its early days than general, regular white America. And this music is transmitted from our urban areas to suburbs and small towns throughout the country with Yo MTV raps. And I really think that the rise of hip hop to become the cultural phenomenon that it is really owes a debt of gratitude to Yo MTV raps. And so it has now become kind of the music of video games. When I go to films, I hear a lot of hip hop music kind of through the soundtrack. And so it's become kind of an American musical form that we expect now in our everyday situations, such as sporting events, etc. Where in the 1980s, it really wasn't like that at all. It was really a specialty type of music that you had to have a connection to the environment that it was being created in to even get a chance to hear it. So I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in a pretty mixed neighborhood and had quite a few young black guys were my friends at that age when I was like 10 or 11. And I remember a couple of my friends would go visit family in either Milwaukee or Chicago, and they would come back with mixtapes of this music that none of us had ever heard of. And they would just put it on their boom boxes. We did have giant boom boxes back in that day, and kind of blare it for the neighborhood. And people really enjoyed hearing, this totally different kind of sound. And so that is really something that MTV helps to transmit. Now, in addition to this, MTV was also the place for the socially relevant concert. And we're going to look at a music video called Sun City as well. And so there were actual concerts like Live Aid and Farm Aid. And these were concerts that were created to raise money and awareness about issues. There was poverty in Africa. That was Live Aid. And then Farm Aid is to help out small farmers, family farms here in America. So it was specific issues that were being, attention was being alerted, to, especially to the youth market, but also finances were helping. Money was being raised, and people were actually getting help that was desperately needed. And so we also see this with a music video that we'll watch this week called Sun City. Now, this one's not a concert, but Sun City is a resort town in South Africa. And in the 1980s, South Africa had a policy of apartheid. And America, we were just out of our own civil rights movement just like a decade and a half prior in the 1960s. And so when we saw a country, South Africa, that was actively engaged in this kind of systematic oppression, it really enraged the youth of America. And Sun City is a 7-minute long video that was in heavy rotation on the channel. And as you'll watch it in our class this week, it's almost like a visual history lesson. So we see images of what's happening in South Africa, but they're also like even split screen images superimposed that are showing the cultural struggle of the civil rights movement in America during the 1960s. So this is really bringing awareness to this issue to America's youth, telling us, I'm using us because I was one of them at that time, telling us that this matters, that this is something that we should fight against. And Sun City ended up being a town that many artists would not to go to. So there was kind of like a strike against Sun City, which ends up helping to change South African policy. And of course, we do see that apartheid end up shifting shortly after. So I'm not going to say MTV was responsible for that shift, but MTV did bring awareness to the youth market in America and throughout the world. So MTV is still a channel with some social justice issues on it, and it's a little bit harder to see that when we look at the channel today, but there are some places where I do feel like this channel shows a responsibility to their specific demographic, and one of these is Rock the Vote. And so MTV is always trying to get young people out to vote, to show them that their voice matters, that this is our country, and that as a young person you have a right to voice your opinion about it. And secondly, I see a lot of health issues that appear on MTV that are particularly steered towards a younger demographic. So things like pregnancy, abortion, which of course is a huge hot topic right now. But there's health matters that are relevant to young people. AIDS was talked about on MTV even at an early time. And so this is a place where actual information and news is transmitted, as well as music and fun for the youth. So I'm really excited about sharing old school MTV with you. I love looking at these videos and sharing a little bit of my personal youth with you all this week, and I hope you do enjoy this week's studies. Thank you so much for your attention.